Hi friends, it's Grace, and today I am going to be talking about the Reddit r/fantasy bingo card and my plans for it. So this is something that the fantasy Reddit does every single year. It runs from the start of April of any given year until the end of March. So rather than being the actual calendar year, it is shifted a little bit. And I just have so much fun planning this every single time. So this post that they posted on Reddit, I will have it linked in the description. It came out on April 1st, so it's been out for a few weeks now. And I've actually read a few of the books that I had planned for this already. And part of that is because one of my goals this year was to put books on the bingo card that I can actually see myself reading in the short term. So not just anything like that can fit, like any book that I never was planning on reading, but now I am because it fits the square. Like that was not what I wanted to do. I really tried to like fill it with books that I already own for the most part, and like really actually have a realistic goal of like not only finishing the card, but using the card to work on my physical TBR. And so there's sort of like a joint goal. And so like I said, I really just have so much fun planning this, even if I don't end up completing it. And so without further ado, let's get into what the bingo squares are and what I have chosen for them. So the first one is title with a title, which essentially means a book title that has a person's title in it. So that could be like king, princess, hero, etc., warrior, like any title that can be given to a person. And the hard mode is that it's not a royal title. So the book that I chose for this is The Coward by Stephen Aryan, because this is clearly the like title of the main character, and this is like the designation that they're given based on the title of the book. And it is not a royal title, so this fits for hard mode. And this has been on my TBR for a little bit now. This copy of the book is actually signed, so it was a gift from Ben for my birthday last year, and so I'm really hoping to get to it soon. So the next square is superheroes, and this is essentially just anything that deals with like legit superheroes in a book. And the hard mode is that it has no affiliation with DC or Marvel, so it's not like, I guess, a graphic novel of them, or it's not like a novelization of that or something. And so I'm not going to hold this one up because it's at the bottom of a stack of books, but I have chosen Vicious by B.E. Schwab because evidently, I haven't read this obviously, but it was in the recommendations as the two main characters being like essentially superheroes. But I think it would be probably more accurate to call them villains, but they are like analogous in that sense. Now the next square up is bottom of the TBR, and this one is basically just any book that you've had on your TBR for a really long time. And so the one I'm choosing for this is The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter, because this is actually one of the first books that I purchased based on watching BookTube recommendations. And so I think I heard some really good things about it, and then I bought it, and then I started to hear that some people didn't like it as much, and I know that this one is a little bit divisive. Some people really love it and some people just don't as much, but I already have it and I've had it for quite some time, so it is about time that I got to it for the bottom of the TBR square. Then the next square is magical realism. So for this one, I have chosen arguably the most famous magical realism novel of all time, which is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And so this is something that I've had on my radar for a really long time. I hauled it kind of recently, and so if I could get to it this year, that would be absolutely wonderful, because this is obviously like a really, really famous novel. And I just think that based on my taste for magical realism that I'll probably really enjoy it. Okay, the next square and the final one in the first row is young adult, and I believe the hard mode for this was that it's published in the last 5 years. And so I have chosen Blade of Secrets by Trisha Levenseller for this. I read Warrior of the Wild last year, and it was just a really like nice story. I really enjoyed that one, and I do believe this was published in like 2021. give or take. So this is definitely within the last 5 years. And this one is about a magical blade, and I think like the person who made it and the person who like wants to use its powers for evil, and so they're trying to keep it away from this person. And it sounds really fun, so I hope that I get to it. It's quite short, seems realistic. The first square on the second row is mundane jobs. So that essentially just means that this character in a fantasy world holds a job that like exists in our world. It's not a fantastical job, it is just a regular person job, and it happens to be taking place in a fantasy world or a speculative book of some sort. And so this is the first book that I don't actually own that I've put on here, but I really want to read it, so we'll see how that goes. And that is Sword Heart by T. Kingfisher, and the reason that I've put this on here is because apparently the main character is a housekeeper, so that is a very mundane job. Next up is published in the 2000s, which just means between 2000 and 2010 or maybe 2009, but either way, I am just squeezing in under the wire with this author, and so that is Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie, because this was published in 2009, so I imagine that any of his novels coming after this would not have fit. However, I have not read this yet, so that is one perk to not getting to my TBR every month, because if I had read this in February, or March actually, it would not have counted for the bingo square. So I had the plan in mind all along, never in doubt. But anyway, yeah, this was published in 2009. I obviously really want to read it. It's been on my TBR for a few months, so hopefully I'll be getting it out of the way soon. Maybe even this month. That might be a little ambitious, but maybe. The next square is Angels and Demons, and I think the hard mode for this was that the angel or demon is one of the main characters, and so you're allowed one reread on the card, and so I put The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab in this spot because you have like Lucifer. Like the entire concept of this book is that she makes a deal with the devil. So I don't know, it might be a little bit of a stretch to consider him one of the main characters. However, he does appear quite a bit, and it definitely counts for just the square itself, but not sure about hard mode. However, I did love this book, and so I am totally down to reread it for this square. Next up, we have 5 short stories, and so this title is pretty self-explanatory. If you like, you can read an entire collection or anthology for this square, but all you have to do is read 5 short stories. And so I have a couple of options for this. I have Worlds Seen in Passing, which is a Tor.com collection of like Tor fiction that was like, you know, collected into this book. And then I also have the Edgar Allan Poe collection that I have perpetually just been in the middle of. I could read 5 of those. So those are a couple of options for that. However, I am interested in reading more collections, so it's quite possible that at some point this year I'll pick up another collection and I'll read that. Next square up is horror, and so I do have a few options that I could do for this, but I chose to put The Hacienda here by Isabel Cañas, and this is set during the Mexican War of Independence or just after it, and I think that it's basically a haunted house story, and it just like, I don't know, I've just heard really good things about it. This one I'm more interested in based on vibes than in anything concrete that I know about the plot. I kind of like the idea of going into a horror not really knowing what's gonna happen. However, it does have a gorgeous cover, and so I'm really looking forward to it. So we're in the 3rd row now, and the next square is indie or self-pub. And I have a few options for this, but what I decided to put here was Of Darkness and Light by Ryan Cahill, because I did read the first book last year, maybe even about a year ago at this point, and I enjoyed it. So this was also a gift from Ben. He treats me well on Christmas and my birthdays, and so this had some fantastic artwork in it, and it really is just such a nice edition of this book. And I think this is the one that I'm gonna go for because I would like to continue in this series. Okay, next up we have Set in the Middle East, and this is actually my current read, and that is Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Chakraborty, which is the sequel to The City of Brass. You can see my bookmark. I'm not very far into it right now, only about 50 pages, but I just started last night, and the beginning is already very interesting, and I'm confident that I'm gonna really enjoy this book, and it is set in a Middle Eastern setting. So I forget what the hard mode for this one was and whether this fits it, but regardless, I know that I will have read this anyway, so I'll have something to fit the square, even if I end up trying to hit hard mode later, but probably not. Then next up, the very middle of the card is published in 2023. And so this is another book that I don't actually own yet, but that is Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. And so I'm either gonna buy this or I'll read Ben's copy. I'm not really sure what I'm doing about that yet, but regardless of like what ends up happening, I do plan to get to that this year, and I am really looking forward to it. I think that based on what people have said about it, it's gonna be a winner for me, and I'm really hoping that it is. Next up is Multiverses. So for this one, I have chosen This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Motar and Max Gladstone. So this comes highly recommended by a lot of people, most of all Ben, who loved it, and this is his copy of the book that I haven't stolen it. He brought it to me. But essentially, I really would love to get to this soon. It's such a short book, but then again, I do know that it also has the very intricate prose, and so it might be a little bit deceiving on its short length, like it might take me a little longer, but this is about two time agents and the letters that they kind of write to each other, and I just think the concept is so interesting, and I'm really looking forward to it, especially based on how much people love it. Next up is an author who is a person of color, and so I'm really glad that I got to fit her into this square, but this is going to be an Octavia E. Butler, and it is going to be Parable of the Sower, which I have on Kindle. And so I loved Kindred. Obviously a really heavy book, so it's not necessarily that you enjoy reading it, but Octavia Butler is so good, and Kindred is a great example of that, and so I just want to read more from her. And this is kind of a great push to do it, because like I've mentioned many a time, books on my Kindle tend to get ignored, so I'm putting this here and I'm gonna read it. It's gonna happen. The next square is a book club or read-along pick, and so that is specifically like an r/fantasy book club or read-along pick. And the hard mode is that you actually read it with them and you participate, but just the regular square is any book that they have chosen for that at any point. And so there are a lot of choices there, and what I ended up putting here is The Ninth Reign by Jen Williams, because if you've been watching the channel for a while, and this is going back a bit, I had this on my TBR for ages and I never read it, and so I just out of shame and out of acceptance, I stopped putting it on my monthly TBRs, because there's only so long you can say that you're going to read a book before you have to admit that you're probably just not going to read it right now. And so I'm hoping that this is the time, that sometime in the next calendar year from now, I can manage to fit this in, because it is something that I was really looking forward to at one point, and I do think that it sounds really interesting. So I promise I will read it, at some point. The next square is a novella, and so this is actually something that I read right at the beginning of April, and that is The Willful Princess and the Piebald Prince by Robin Hobb. This is sort of to tide us over before we start the Rainwild Chronicles in May, but this was a lovely little novella. Robin Hobb just remains so good. I love her writing, and yeah, this was a very easy to finish read, and it is a novella, and so therefore it fits the novella square. So that is one that I have completed. And then next up, we actually have another square that I have completed, and that is Mythical Beasts. And if I'm remembering correctly, the hard mode for this is just that the mythical beast is not a dragon. It might be more detailed than that, but basically what I put here was The Memory of Souls by Jen Lyons, because Obviously this series is called The Chorus of Dragons, and there are dragons, but there are also a lot of other like various kind of creatures and things going on in the magic of this world. Like there are very much things aside from dragons. There's a lot in here, so it fits for Mythical Beasts. Then next up is the square for elemental magic, and so I have chosen The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. So of course this is the finale to the Broken Earth trilogy. I have already read the first two, and I just never got around to concluding the series, and so I would really like to, because I know this is a series that I want to finish, and I only have one book left, and this deals with like earth magic. So it's not necessarily people being able to wield the elemental magics, like all four of them or whatever, but this very much is an elemental magic. Like it deals with stone and earthquakes and whatever else you might think of when you think of manipulating the earth. And yeah, it's really cool the way that it's dealt with in here. Now, the next square is myths and retellings, and so the hard mode for this is just that it's not a Greek mythological retelling. And this one could probably change. I may choose to have another book here instead, but currently is another Kindle book, and that is These Violent Delights. And so obviously this isn't like mythological, but it is a retelling of Romeo and Juliet, and so it definitely fits in the square, since it's both like mythological retellings and just like retellings in general. So that one I am less sure about, but it certainly still does fit the square. So at least I know that I have something that I own that I could read for that. Okay, we're on the final row. So the next square is queer norm setting, and so this is another book that I don't own. However, it is my most anticipated book of the year for 2023, and so that is Labyrinths Heart by M.A. Carrick, the third and final book in the Rook and Rose trilogy. And that trilogy is absolutely a queer norm setting. You have characters that have like a lot of different identities and representations, and it is very much looked upon as a matter of course in that world. Like that's just how it is. It is not any sort of like, it's not analogous to our real world at all. It is totally normal. And I really like reading from settings like that. It is very, very refreshing and pleasant. And so actually A Chorus of Dragons is another one that has that, and I really like that about them. And Labyrinths Heart is definitely going to fit in that queer norm setting. Next up, we have another square that I have completed recently, and so that is a coastal setting. And this is a book that I actually am going to have a video coming out about. I'm not sure if it's going to be before or after this, but it is The Bone Ships by R.J. Barker. And so this absolutely is a coastal setting, because the entire world, like of this world, is a bunch of islands and like a seafaring world and a seafaring people, and they deal a lot with like, well, they deal a lot with the sea, like they're on the water, but when they are on land, they are on a coast, like always. So it definitely fits for coastal setting. Now, next up is a square called Druid, and this one is one that I am kind of less clear on, because it seems similar in some senses to elemental magic, except it's not quite the same. And so I got this from the recommendations thread. I didn't actually know by myself that this book would fit for the square, but that is The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. And so this is another one that I've been looking forward to for quite some time, and I'm just like really glad that I can put it on the square, because I had no idea what I was going to pick for Druid, and the fact that I find out that a book that's already pretty high on my priority list can fit in that square, it was an automatic for me. So as I proceed to the second last square on the card, you are allowed at any point to substitute one square with a square from a previous year if you want to. And so I think that the one that I chose to replace that was here was robots, just because I didn't have anything for that. I don't see myself reading anything for that. If I was continuing in the Monk and Robot series, then maybe, but I am not continuing in that series. And so I substituted this with the square called Name in the Title from last year's card. So that is basically just that a character's name is in the title of the book, and the hard mode is that a character's full name is in the title of the book. And so I am going for Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Of course, Jonathan Strange, well, I hope that's the person's actual name, but regardless, I definitely think this counts as a full name in the title. It's like a name and a half because Mr. Norrell is not technically a full name, but this entire title is names. So I thought of this immediately and I was like, okay, this definitely fits. Another one for this perhaps could be The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi, but I already have an S.A. Chakraborty book on the card, so I can't repeat her as an author. But this one works perfectly for this. And then finally, the last square on the card is sequel. So that is self-explanatory. It can be any sequel, and the hard mode for that is that it is book 3 or later, I think, in a series. Double check on the actual Reddit post for that one. However, the book that I have down for this is A Dance with Dragons by George R.R. Martin. In hindsight, I don't really know why I didn't put A Feast for Crows down there, because both of them would accomplish the exact same thing, and I'm more likely to finish A Feast for Crows first. So I might change that. I don't really know like what was up with that choice, but either one of them is gonna work, so do with that what you will. Whenever I do this video, even when I try and be quick, it always ends up pretty long, so I hope that you enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts, or if you're also doing this, like some of your ideas. I would love to hear them. And please like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you'd like to see more content from me. I post on most Mondays and Thursdays, and as always, I will have my socials and Discord with Ben linked in the description if you're interested in any of that stuff. And I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye!